All right, then, and I think we will have plenty from Todd later. So, Becky, we will now take the presentation from PG&E on the Community Wildfire Safety Program to include the public safety power shutoffs.
Good morning, Chair Gore, members of the board. Becky Riggin from the County Executive Office. Supervisor Gusterson, earlier this spring you requested a presentation by PG&E on their wildfire safety efforts over the past year. This morning we have invited Brandon Sanders, who is from PG&E Sierra Division, to provide an update to your board on the Community Wildfire Safety Program, including public safety power shutoff. So with that, I'll invite Brandon up for his presentation.
Good morning, Chairwoman Gore, supervisors. Nice to see you again. Brandon Sanders, Sierra Division Public Affairs, PG&E. We have here today for you a brief presentation, and then of course I'm happy to answer any questions. So I'll move through the slides quickly. I know you all have a stacked agenda. Really grateful for the timed item. Thank you. So this covers some of the items we're going to touch on, including some significant improvements we've made to the public safety power shutoff program over the last year. I think you'll be very pleased with the progress that's been made to lessen impacts to our communities. Some specific information about Placer County itself, our customer resource centers, some information around grid configuration, and vegetation management as well. So PG&E's stated goal for 2020 is in three parts. We intend to make PSPS smaller, shorter, and smarter. So what that means is we want to lessen the expanse of the impacts. We're going to be sure that we're doing restoration more quickly so the actual outage is much shorter. And we also intend to be smarter about it, and that's in a number of ways, including the deployment of the latest technology and sectionalizing and microgrids. So just a brief overview of the system extent in Placer County. As you can see, there's just about 1,800 line miles. About half of those are in a high fire threat district as defined by the CPUC. That's on the distribution side, and another roughly 160 miles out of the 350-ish that are in a high fire threat on the transmission side. About 104,000 customers, 21,000 of which are in that high fire threat district. We have identified through our medical baseline rate program about 4,200 customers with medical sensitivities of some kind, and we're doing a lot around supporting those populations. And we are working with the county and all the cities therein to identify critical facilities and do everything we can to keep those in service during public safety power shutoff. So this is sort of a report card as far as what we achieved last year and what we're getting done this year. We have deployed 5 weather stations and 6 cameras. That's going to allow us to be smarter about PSPS just in terms of using real-time on-the-ground data as far as weather conditions are concerned. We were able to deploy 5 customer resource centers last year. We're working closely with Placer County OES and a lot of your different facilities folks to secure agreements that are going to have us well positioned to deploy those in a greater extent in the coming year. One of the big things that's of benefit to some of the wildland urban interface communities in Placer County is the construction of sectionalizing devices, which I'll get into briefly here in a moment. System hardening, it's not been the main focus because the devices are allowing us to be smarter about how we deploy PSPS. We have some good information for you today on microgrids and the progress around that. And I'll speak to our enhanced vegetation management, which is exceeding state standards for line clearance. So this is a brief overview of where the weather stations are located. They're up all the way up in Hellhole. There's 2 in Forest Hill and 1 up in Alta. You can actually see the 1 in Forest Hill if you're driving up Forest Hill Road on the right-hand side, just past Todd Valley. There's 1 up on a pole. It's kind of cool to look at. But the intent is to have roughly 1 station every 20 circuit miles by 2022. Here's an overview of where our cameras are installed. These give us great visibility into field conditions and where fires might be starting. They're also widely used by our fire partners as well. This is an overview of where we have customer resource centers targeted for the community, as you can see, or for the county. As you can see, they're widespread throughout the county and all the areas that could potentially be impacted. We're working closely with the CEO's office, OES, and others to secure those sites so that we have those ready to deploy. This slide, I won't get into too much detail, but you can see the complexity of the electric distribution and transmission system in Placer County. This is specific to transmission. The thing that Placer County has going for it that others like Sierra or Nevada don't is that you've got feeds coming in from multiple places, which allows us to be more nimble in how we operate the grid, and again, do our best to reduce the size of these events in future fire seasons. So this piece of information here, I believe, hearing from Becky, there was a constituent that had a question around where these sectionalizing devices were being installed. As you can see, it's typically in areas where there's an island that's not technically in that high fire threat district, but it is surrounded by that high fire threat district. So places like North Auburn, Loomis, Penryn, some of those areas where the fire threat in a localized area might not be as extreme as the outlying areas. So what we're then able to do is island those circuits, keep certain areas energized that aren't as high risk for a fire, and that allows us to still cut off the flow of electricity to the higher threat areas. This is going to be a great benefit to Placer County because we're going to really be able to be much more surgical about how we deploy PSPS in the coming year. And we're going to continue on this work in the years ahead, but 23 sectionalizing devices is a pretty significant number as far as the program is concerned. This is some work that's ongoing. We are really been focused on the sectionalizing and the microgrid work here in Placer because we believe that's where the biggest opportunities are immediately, the low-hanging fruit per se. But our hardening work does involve a number of things, including setting poles deeper with taller poles, wider cross arms, coated conductor, and those types of things. We're constantly reviewing the system quality and configuration and looking for opportunities to do hardening projects. One of the more exciting things that I'm happy to announce for Placer County is that we are actively working to construct microgrid systems in the communities of Colfax and Forest Hill. This is going to allow us to maintain essential services in power during a public safety power shutoff and potentially other emergencies, fires, low snow events, and those types of things. And really what this involves is the installation of what's called a pre-installed interconnection hub. It's basically a plug-and-play transformer that we can roll a generator right up to, plug it in, bring a certain polygon of businesses and what structures and whatnot into power. Definitely targeted on underground circuits. We're still, based on our rules, not in a position to power certain overhead areas under PSPS conditions, so we're really focused on areas of opportunity where there's an underground system, like in Colfax and part of Forest Hill. And those will be operational for this fire season. We're being very aggressive on vegetation management. We have to be. Vegetation contact is really the primary concern when we have these high wind events. You could have trees well outside of our right-of-way that we have no right to touch come into our conductor, where that's always going to remain a risk. But what we're trying to do is go from that 4 feet mandated state clearance to a 12-foot clearance, and additionally clearing everything up to the sky so that there's no overhanging branches. And it's a major undertaking, but Placer is in the higher number of line miles around the system as far as what's being achieved on that front. I'm sure that you've been seeing tree trucks everywhere. They're all working for PG&E, and they're all working real hard to get these types of situations in place so that we can reduce the vegetative contact and the risk associated with that. We have a lot of great resources on our website, pge.com/weather. Folks can go there and get forecasting data, not just from a weather perspective, but we also have a 7-day outlook for PSPS that's updated daily. So if you see something in the news that says red flag warning or extreme fire conditions, you can go to the PG&E website, pull up that outlook, and it'll tell you based on division whether or not we anticipate a PSPS happening over the course of that following week. There's a lot of good information at each of these websites. I'd encourage all of your constituents to visit those. Most importantly, we need our customers to update their contact information by either calling our call center or going to their online profile for their account. During a PSPS, if we can't contact you, that's really problematic for both us and you. So we really need people to focus on getting their contact information updated. And really, again, I can't emphasize enough how much good information is on these websites for your constituents to review and help them prepare, not just for power outages, but any kind of emergency situation or challenge that might come up. So that concludes the slide deck. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brandon. Appreciate the update. Supervisor Gustafson?
Thanks, Brandon. Great to see you.
Too.
And thanks for all the efforts. Really appreciate it. A couple questions on the re-energizing timing. that was such a concern for Colfax and Forest Hill. There was extended outages, and everybody was back in power everywhere else, but of course, the further up the hill, the longer it took. I think at the session that we had last December, over here in the library, you talked a bit about doubling the resources in the helicopters to fly the lines. Is that in fact happening?
Yes, I
Bill?
have a few updates on that front in
Okay.
terms of the restoration. So with one of the focal points being shorter duration, we are doing a number of things. We've doubled our available aviation resources. These are primarily contract aviation resources, helicopters. In addition, we're under contract with 2 fixed-wing aircraft that are able to do LiDAR surveys at night, which is going to really help. We're also enacting a playbook, if you will, to bring in resources from out of division. So for example, bringing folks up from Kern County, in from Humboldt, wherever there are resources that could be relocated to help speed up that restoration process. We also have the opportunity to request assistance from other utilities such as SMUD or Roseville Electric if they have resources available. And it's really all about, as you know, completing those patrols to ensure the circuits are intact before re-energizing. But we are very much doubling down on the resources that will be available. And we're also looking at the possibility of doing some patrols in certain areas at night. But the goal is to get those restorations done within 12 to 24 hours.
That's great. Those, those vulnerable communities, I mean, they're small, they don't have easy access to areas further down the hill to leave their homes. There was a lot of fear of people leaving their homes and this lack of security in the community if they left during the outage to go down the hill to try to get services. So that leads to the CRCs. And I applaud the efforts at looking at all these sites. Are we committed then to any of these sites? I see a lot of proposed, and there's status notes.
Yes, so your staff well, I should say Todd's staff is working closely with us to
Okay.
get those agreements in place. They will be in place before PSPS season, and we're going to have much more available to us in terms of hard-walled sites as opposed to just the tents.
Great.
But just a quick note, if we find ourselves remaining in a COVID state into PSPS season, we do have protocols in place to alter the sort of configuration of those to allow for things like social distancing and whatnot. So we're definitely mindful of that as well.
Great. And then on the temporary microgrids, we talked and heard a presentation about that, especially up in Forest Hill and in Colfax, where if we could at least keep some power on to some stores and gas stations, fueling opportunities, that was really critical to those communities. Again, it says we will have those. Do we have them? Are we
They're
ready
being
to go?
constructed now.
Okay,
And
so
so,
they
for
will be
example,
ready to go this year.
Yeah, so for example, in Colfax, we had to work with Union Pacific on some land, and of course, working closely with Wes, the city manager, on that. That's moving forward. And then in Forest Hill, the equipment's actually going to be placed on PCWA property behind the high school.
So in those areas, there will be some opportunity for local supplies to be available for the community?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And fuel?
I would have to take a look at the polygon to be certain about the gas station specifically, but I do know that it's all focused right now on underground circuits with the opportunity to grow the extent of that island, if you will, off into the future years, whether we underground certain stretches or do aggressive veg management to mitigate that risk. But there's going to be definitely a polygon defined. I can work to get that for you, Supervisor.
That would
I
be
just don't-
great. The fuel was more important for their generators. Their
course, totally get
generators
it.
were running out of fuel every 24 hours, and there was no fuel.
I'm fairly certain that both polygons include at least one gas station, but
That would be
I can
great.
validate that and get it back.
Right.
I'll contact Kelly with that information.
Super. Thank you so much, and I appreciate the time and energy
course.
coming and giving us the presentation. I know going into the summer months and into the fire season, people are very concerned,
course.
not having a repeat. They just got their businesses reopened. They want to stay open.
Of course, fully
Thank you.
understand. Thank you.
Supervisor Wygant.
Brenda, thanks for the presentation. I live in the foothills about halfway between Lincoln and Auburn, and I'm curious. So last year, I was shut down almost all of the time, not all of the time, and most of the time I was shut down. It was not very windy at my house, and so I got a lot of calls and questions from constituents who are like me. Could you talk a little bit about the vision as it relates to how many weather stations you expect to have and what degree of accuracy ultimately you're going to work towards as it relates to that side of the-
Absolutely. Well, to begin, I'd be happy to arrange a conversation with one of our meteorology professionals, if that's helpful. But generally speaking, the goal by 2022 is to have a weather station every 20 miles a circuit.
Great.
So that's going to really give us a granular look at very localized weather patterns. Additionally, the modeling that we've developed is proprietary modeling that's very specific to electric utility. We have gone more granular on that, so it's very much more a fine analysis as opposed to more expansive in terms of geography. So that piece has been improved. But I do know that with the addition of the sectionalizing devices, the refinement of the meteorology work, and the expanded weather station network, I do believe that you'll experience shorter and fewer events off into the future. And for a lot of folks, they have that comment, well, there was no wind where I live. And I know that you're all aware, but just to sort of speak to that briefly, electricity flows from out of the area through oftentimes very rugged terrain, heavily wooded, brushy areas, and those are the areas where the risk lies. But you could be fed from a circuit that's 40 miles away potentially, and maybe 40 miles away you're in a canyon and there's very strong winds with underlying brush. So that's kind of the complexity of it, is that while there might not be wind at a person's residence, it could very much be extreme weather conditions elsewhere from where they're served. So,
Thank you.
thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brandon. Let's see, do we have any public comment on this item? All right. Well, we appreciate the update, and let's hope we don't have to have PSPSs this summer, but we really do appreciate the work that is being done to make sure our residents are prepared.